Welcome to Inclusion Insights podcast, where we share practical strategies and stories to help build more inclusive workplaces. I'm Roda Ogunpehin, inclusion consultant and founder of Arctic Consult. Today, we're looking beyond the workplace and into lived experience. My guest is Jonathan Kemp, author of Finding Peace of Mind, a raw and inspiring memoir exploring bipolar disorder, depression, addiction, and dyslexia. So in the next few minutes, you hear how one man's journey of resilience can teach us all about empathy, hope, and inclusion. Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. To begin, what inspired you to write Finding Peace of Mind? And what message do you hope readers can take away after reading it?
It's a very good question. So what inspired me was, it was actually during COVID, and I was having a really rough time. And I was thinking about what I'd achieved in life, and it suddenly dawned on me that I could actually determine what success and wealth could be, which I hadn't really thought of in that context before. I had very much a sort of traditional view. And then I realized, well, actually, and as an entrepreneur, I think the key is, what have you got right now where you can make a difference in the environments that you're working in? And I thought, well, right now, my greatest wealth is in fact my experience with mental health and neurodiversity. I've got over 40 plus years experience, 20 plus of trying to fix it myself, unfortunately not successfully, and 20 years of getting medical help and sometimes following it more than others. And then the experience of COVID, which I thought would be super easy because I know what terrible feels like and couldn't be any worse. Unfortunately, I was wrong. And so all of this, I felt actually, this experience on both sides of the fence, trying to do it myself, getting professional help, actually had a huge value. And also because I'm highly analytical, I'm always analyzing what works, what doesn't work, what could I do to change, what could I do to modify. And so that has a huge value. And that was the inspiration behind writing the book. I wasn't prepared to write it unless I had a period of mental stability myself. Unfortunately, after changing meds at the end of COVID, about 5 months later, my brain cleared. And it was like a miracle. So then I decided to write the book. And what would I like people to take out of the book? To be honest, it's really simple. I think I would like to be able to inspire people that things are possible, things can change, and also give people hope. And part of the book are practical strategies on things that we can do, which will help us in our day-to-day lives. And I hope those will be useful for people as well.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So your memoir is very open about your experiences with bipolar disorder, depression, addiction, and dyslexia. So was there a point in your journey when you first began to believe that peace of mind was actually possible?
It's a really interesting question. And thinking about it, I think, again, that's been a journey. So I think the first time that I felt that there was a solution or peace of mind might be possible was actually when I was attending 12-step programs. And probably the most well-known one is Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous, Work Addicts Anonymous. And to be honest, I probably could quite happily sit in all of them. And working through their spiritual program, that did help, albeit temporarily, but it definitely did help. I think the next stage was when I first took medication. So I first saw a doctor in my late 30s when I was diagnosed with clinical depression. And originally I said, no, I don't have it, because I knew no different. Things had been the way they'd been since I was 6 or 7. And it took, actually I saw a therapist first and then saw another therapist who also diagnosed me with clinical depression. It took the therapist about a year to persuade me to see a psychiatrist, because I saw that as a weakness. And it took the psychiatrist about a year and a half to persuade me to take medication. And so the second sort of marker of where I got a sense that things might be different or could be better was after about 6 months, my brain started to clear. And then I suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I really was depressed. But I had to have the experience of a clear brain to appreciate what a clear brain was and therefore be able to clearly understand and identify depression. And then I use the expression slightly flippantly, but I sort of bumbled along for the next 20 or so years. And then during COVID, I had a really rough time and I was very, very close to calling it a day. I went and got more help and I saw an excellent psychiatrist and she recommended I change my medications, which I knew I had to do. And about 5 months later, I was walking down the street and I suddenly realized I could feel the sun on my face, on my arms, and there was no more interference in my brain. And then the other thing was, I just suddenly realized, it wasn't an effort to live anymore, to be, to breathe. And for me, that's a complete miracle. And it's been that way for about 3 years now.
Fantastic. It's really great to hear that very, very deep element of how you transitioned from the dark place, so to speak, to feeling the sun in your face again. That's really great.
Literally, it felt like a miracle.
Oh, wow, that's great. So you've spoken openly about living with bipolar disorder, depression, addiction, and dyslexia. So for people joining us today who may not fully understand these experiences, how do these conditions show up in everyday life? And can they present differently at home compared to in the workplace?
So the thing about mental health and neurodiversity is that it can present differently with different people. And also the challenge is with medication, what will work for me, say in terms of the bipolar disorder, if someone has exactly the same symptoms of bipolar as I do, their taking of the same medication may not have the same effects. So I think both how the illnesses present themselves and the solutions are different for different people. For myself, I have what they call bipolar disorder type 2, which means that when I go high, I'll go up, but I stop at this sort of the very fine line between sanity and insanity, and I will be hyperactive. I'll be taking risks, grandiose thinking, spending lots of money, hyper-analysis, hyper-organizing, hyper-planning, hyper-energy, until the stress becomes so much. And for me, I can be in that sort of mode of operation for quite literally months, 3, 4, 5, 6 months. However, when the stress becomes sufficient, I will then crash. And when I crash, it's within 24 hours. And for about the next 4 to 6 weeks, it's like my brain has been removed and a sort of sandstorm is roaring around inside, eating away at my skull. And even though I've been through this, many times, each time is like the first time. And each time I have an absolute certainty it will never end. So people with bipolar disorder have quite a higher percentage of taking action to terminate their life. And I completely understand why, because the crash is terrifying and it seems like it's never going to finish. There is also bipolar disorder type 1, which means that when you actually go up, you cross that line between sanity and insanity and you go into psychosis, which means that you're seeing things, you're hearing things, potentially you're someone else or you're multiple personalities. And at that point, it's crucial to go into hospital and allow them to try and find the right medication to bring you back down. And there are other types of bipolar. There's one called cyclothymia, where for some people, some of my friends that I know have got it, they say it's almost you have the high and the lows simultaneously. And it just sounds really debilitating. For depression, how it manifests itself for me is that everything is just an effort. I wake up, it's an effort. I think, God, have I got to live another day? Living another day is an effort. Getting out of bed is an effort. Just everything is an effort. And when the depression's bad, I just have continual voices in my head just telling me how hopeless I am, how useless I am, how stupid I am, how I've achieved nothing. And it is relentless. And then in addition to that, with the addictive personality, it's sort of as it says on the tin, really. So, for example, I've had periods where, I like chocolate, but I've had periods where I've had to have it. And even though I think I've already had too much, I can't stop myself. And I'll be at the shop and I'll actually feel like guilt and shame taking the chocolate up, knowing that this isn't choice, it's absolute necessity. And I can't stop it. And you can apply that to work, to drink, drugs, everything. So I actually stopped taking drink and drugs when I was about 21, I think. And the reason for that was because I knew, for me, the line between sanity and insanity was finer than a piece of hair. And if I took drink or drugs, I crossed that line. Finally, with neurodiversity, so I'm probably on the spectrum for most things. However, as with mental health, the one thing that is overriding is dyslexia. How that presents itself is that I find it difficult processing information in my head. So if I'm listening to someone, say, describing something complex or using words that I haven't heard before, very quickly my brain will just scramble. And that's the same when I'm reading as well. And from a practical point of view, whether it's studying or it's working, I will take probably time and a half to double time what it will take someone without dyslexia to write a report or do a presentation. And it's a sort of agonizing process each time I do it. And the dyslexia, and there are also other features of dyslexia, like a very poor short-term memory. And mine is like, literally, I can take my medications and within about 30 seconds, I cannot remember if I've taken them or not. And so I lose things all the time. So I now have a bleeper on my phone, on my iPad, on my glasses, on my wallet, everything, all the things that I tend to lose all the time. So that gives you a flavor of how these things have manifested for myself.
On inclusion insights, we often talk about how workplaces can become more supportive and inclusive. So, from your experience, what can employers and colleagues, how can they better support people living with bipolar disorder, depression, addiction, or dyslexia?
So I think the first thing is probably some of the most talented employees, whether it's at the shop floor, for want of a better expression, or it's at board level,
Yeah.
are probably going to have mental health issues and neurodiversity. And the reason I say that is because, say, for like myself with the mental health issues, I was driven. You know, I will decide I'm going to do something. I will then almost like shoot a laser beam to what I want to do, and I will completely ignore everything to my left and right until I achieve whatever I want to do. And to me, that's just a normal way of doing things. However, a lot of people don't have that level of focus and concentration. Similarly, with the things like dyslexia, I think in terms of process and systems. It's just like water off a duck's back. And it took me a long time to realize that not everybody, in fact, probably comparatively few people think that way. So if somebody's describing a problem, I will be listening and thinking of that problem as a process or a system which can be managed. So I think a key thing is to remember that some of the most talented people will have mental health issues and neurodiversity, whether it's autism or dyslexia or whatever it is. And the reason they're so effective is because of these attributes, for want of a better word. So what can an employer do? I think things have changed enormously. And I think the real turning point was COVID and the realization and the understanding that mental health and neurodiversity affects everyone. No one is immune, and it's just a feature of the body. And so if we are professional sports people, we will have a team of people to look after us, psychiatrists, physios, etc., etc. And you just treat that as normal. You treat it as normal that the body is going to be put under severe stress And therefore, if you're a professional footballer or if you're a athlete, you are going to need assistance, both in terms of managing your body, but also managing your thinking, etc., etc. And so how I see it is in the workplace, for those jobs that are physical, people need to take care of their bodies and their environments. And so that's why we have very strong health and safety regulations, because those help to bring in the safety standards. And then there are a lot of jobs which don't really require a lot of physical activity, but require a huge amount of activity of the brain. So whether it's in law or it's accountancy or you might be dealing with complaints in the service sector. So my feeling about the workplace, and I think across all occupations, is that they all require the human brain to be operating and operating well. But also this puts a lot of stress on the human brain. And as with a physical athlete who's putting huge stress on their bodies, a lot of workers, by dint of the work they're doing, are putting huge stress on the brain. And the brain is just another physical part of the body. And if the stress becomes too much, then that's going to impact the brain and impact that person's ability to work effectively. And I think post-COVID, people are starting to understand this much better. So what I think that employers can do is actually have an education program for all employees from the shop floor up to the board about neurodiversity, the different types of neurodiversity, how they manifest, about mental health, the different types of mental health, how they manifest. And it should be an ongoing program which everyone is required to participate. And then there should also be a similar program for new entrants at whatever level they're going into an organization. And then in addition to the education piece, there needs to be a clear roadmap of what to do to help people. And I think there's a couple of areas where people need help. One is just day to day. They might just need to be able to have someone to talk to be able to talk through whatever issues they're having, or if they're having challenges on the mental health front or the neurodiversity front, to be able to talk through those. I think another arm is offering people the opportunity to get professional assessments and professional help. And so, for example, if somebody thinks they're dyslexic, it's no big deal. If they want, they can go and get tested. If they have got dyslexia, for example, then they can put in workplace adjustments. And also, their manager knows that it is going to take this person slightly longer to produce the same work as someone else. However, the important thing is often the work will be at a similar standard, if not better. So, for example, for me, one adjustment, which actually I put in place, I work for myself, so I put in place only of January this year, is now I very rarely type. I always do voice to text. And that for me is transformational because I don't have to worry about spelling any longer. And also I can speak far faster than I can type. So I can speak at the speed of thought, which actually for me with my dyslexia works really well. A second adjustment for me is knowing that I have a professional copy editor in the form of AI on hand, on tap, 24/7. And so I can then produce a first draft really quickly. I can check through it. I can then give it to AI. I then ask AI to reproduce that work using my own voice, my own language, my own intonation, my conversational style that I write in. And it will produce it in seconds. Historically, I would have had to send that report to someone. I'd have had to wait a few days for it to come back. It would then have come back. I'd have had to go through it again, make further adjustments, send it off again. And that whole process could take, a week to 2 weeks. Whereas now, 10 seconds. Fantastic.
Mm. Yeah.
Um,
Indeed.
and then I think another arm to all of this is that companies need to have a really clear roadmap of what to do if someone is being affected either personally, so it's affecting themselves, or what to do if their work is being affected. There needs to be a clear roadmap for both of those instances. And a lot of this will come through the education and setting of standards, setting of guidelines in exactly the same way as health and safety. So if you work in the oil industry, health and safety is not an optional extra. They are on it and very, very rigorous. And I think mental health and safety should be treated in the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely, Jonathan. Thank you. Those are really, really great tips. So writing about lived experience can be both painful and freeing at the same time. So how did writing your story down affect your own journey towards self-acceptance?
During the process of writing, so with the dyslexia, as soon as I start thinking I'm going to write something, my brain immediately tells me, A, I can't do it. B, it'll be too complicated. No one will understand what I'm saying anyway. And D, I might as well not do it. And so for me, with the dyslexia, that was something, a hurdle I had to get over. The way I got over it was sort of threefold. The first was I decided to write about things that I could remember most clearly. And I could write about things which were like shorter chapters. So I would be writing about things that I would find quick to do, easier to do. So that got the sort of the motivation going. And then in terms of writing and having the confidence to write in a way that people will understand, I thought, well, when I speak, people generally understand what I'm talking about. I mean, I might be unclear at times, but generally they get a gist of what I'm talking about. So what I decided to do was write as I speak. So I would have, for example, my trip to Vietnam, which was quite a turning point after my medication and everything started working. And so that was very current. That's when in Vietnam was when I started planning the book. Once I'd done my initial plan, I would then write it or type it. And as I was typing it, I would imagine that I was sitting next to someone and I was speaking to them. So that's how I got over the writing. And then I got a female editor to go through it. I then got a male editor to go through it. I then got the female editor to do a sensitivity check. And actually it was a sensitivity check is where, for me, the value of writing really came to the forefront, because when I asked them to do the edits, I mean, both of them came back probably with, 600, 700 edits. And I went through them in a couple of hours, and I think I ticked yes, okay to 98%. And then when the sensitivity check came in, I thought, right, I'll knock this out in a day. And actually 6 weeks later, I was still working on it. And where it was helpful is that the editor had asked me to clarify a lot of points and also to include things they thought that I'd missed. And it was particularly also on the analytical section. So the book's split 2/3 memoir, 1/3 analysis of what works and doesn't work. And it was on that analysis is where I really started to, I suppose, simplify my thinking about what I've been through, but also get much more clarity about what exactly does help and what doesn't help. So, for example, I decided, and it was quite late on, I think, that I would write about, I call them foundations. What foundations in terms of behaviors and thinking styles, etc., make a difference for me, how many and in what order. And it was that how many and in what order where my thinking really had to be clear. And then within each of those, so for example, my number one is sleep. And within sleep, what are my priorities? So for me, it's getting 8 hours plus sleep. Well, actually, now I'm on this charity walk, it's about 9 hours, not getting up, like 4 o'clock in the morning to crack on, because that's, for me, it's part of the hypomania. And that was a huge benefit for me. Another example I had the idea of getting other people to talk about what it was like as a friend or a colleague. What did they notice? And that was quite an insight for me, because I never really thought about how do I come across to other people. And by getting 7 people to talk about it, that gave me a lot more clarity on how, mental health and neurodiversity comes along. And I think the other time where it's been really helpful has actually been from the feedback of people who've read it, and people say, gosh, your resilience is just incredible. And funnily enough, I don't think about I particularly have high level of resilience, but the feedback has been so consistent and the reason I feel that is because going through what I've been through is just normal for me. But actually for a lot of people, it's quite catastrophic. And to be able to persist with that not over weeks, months, but years and tens of years, I now realize that required a huge level of determination, a huge level of resilience, and a huge level of flexibility, which I hadn't really understood or accepted before. So that was the third sort of time span where I've been able to understand myself better as a result of writing things, people reading it, and then giving me feedback.
So finally, where can people joining us today find your book, and how can they connect with you if they'd like to follow your journey?
By all means. So the book is called Finding Peace of Mind. And if you type that into Google, it should come up with how it can be obtained on Amazon or in Waterstones, etc. And all the profits for the first year go towards 3 of the mental health charities that I'm raising funds for. And the reason I did that, I didn't want people to think, well, the only reason he's doing this public walk is to raise funds for his book, etc., etc. And so that's not my objective at all. It was to share my experience, strength, and hope to benefit others. So that's the reason why I'm giving all profits to the charities. And the second thing is, if you type in Jonathan Kemp London in Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, you should come up with my name. I'm dressed in a bright yellow T-shirt with a bright yellow hat, which is what I wear while I'm walking. And you should be able to find me that way as well. And through that, there is a link in all my bios, which takes you through to a menu where you can donate if you want. You can actually get the book as a free download. You can download my route if you want to join me, and so on.
Great. That's fantastic, Jonathan. Thank you again for joining us and for sharing your story so openly with us today. Finding peace of mind is a testament to courage, resilience, and the importance of sharing our own stories. So if you are someone that you know is struggling, please remember that you are not alone. Help and hope are always within reach. I'm Roda Ogunpehin, and I look forward to welcoming you back on our next episode of Inclusion Insight.